Hello everyone and welcome to video 4.2.10 for the Legal Studies guy. Only two to go, which means only two more quotes from me. Second last one, an Audrey Hepburn quote. Nothing is impossible. The word itself says, I'm possible. Hey, don't limit yourself. Don't say, hey, that's impossible. Give it a crack, particularly preparing well for your final SAC and for your exams. You got to throw up the stumps. May as well make the most of it and see how you go. So we are at our second last dot point. We are still on, and we will finish on the concept of constitutional reform. So we're looking at referendums. And today we're focused on factors affecting the success of a referendum. So um, doesn't necessarily have to be negative factors, although we will primarily focus on factors that limit the success of referendums because of the fact that only 8 out of 45 have been successful. But certainly there's a flip side to each of those, which we'll elaborate as well, because there are factors that affect the success of a referendum in a positive way, make it more likely to succeed. Our key skill here is an analysis, so we need to be able to analyse this, which I'll talk through in the skills section. You're going to be able to have a great conversation with someone over the next week or so. Perhaps they'll bring up 2023, which we'll learn about next video. But you'll be able to explain to them why referendums are successful or not. So, this is a lovely little, and this was a link from the last video. This is a lovely little look at all the referendums from 1901 to 1999. It is also missing the 2023 referendum on the end. But shows you, so 45 referendums, not 44, because we had 2023, 45 referendums and only 8 have been successful across that time. So 3 in 1977, 67 and 46, and then we go way back, in between the two world wars, 1928, and we go back to like 1906 and back to 1906 and 1910. So across the 124, 125 years of Australia being a federation of Australia, having this constitution, we have been really reluctant to change it, despite some of the reasons why we would want to change it that we looked at 2 videos ago. The fact that it is in a way outdated, it doesn't reflect a modern society. And some of the legal structures in it have been shown that, they could be improved and they could be better. So if that's the case, why do referendums consistently fail? Well, I'm going to group these factors affecting the likely success of referendums into 3 groups. We're going to talk about process, we're going to talk about people, and we're going to talk about politics. So I'll start with process. And this is one that, we've alluded to in previous videos, particularly our last video when we looked at double majority in 4.2.9 in detail and the process of passing a referendum. But ultimately, the referendum process is something that affects the likely success of referendums. The double majority provision is extremely difficult to satisfy. There was an attempt in the what my animations are doing there. There was an attempt in 1974 to actually change it so that you only needed 3 states rather than 4, because it was recognised that this threshold for passing a referendum is perhaps too high, and naturally that proposal failed. Really difficult to satisfy. When we're doing an analysis, you need to be able to look at issues in more detail. You need to be able to use facts and figures to show or support a point that you're making. And some really good ones with the double majority provision. So we've had 5 referendums that have received a majority of votes overall, but have failed to reach a majority in a majority of states. We've even had one referendum that had 62% of the vote nationally and still failed to achieve a double majority. So if we look back at our list of referendums, and I feel like I'll be flicking back here quite a bit, But we'll go down our list of unsuccessful referendums. So here, only got 2 states, but still got 53% of the vote. Here, 50.5%, 0.57, but got 3 states. 50.3, still got 3 states. Notice how it got the 2 big states, hence why that overall number's a bit higher. And this is the one I was just talking about. 62% of the vote nationally, but missed the 3 smaller states, Queensland, Western Australia, and Tasmania at the time. Missed Tasmania by only a few thousand votes, so very, very close to passing that referendum. Then even this terms of senators won 50% of the vote, only 2 states. So we know the referendum process is something that affects the likelihood of them succeeding because the threshold is so high. As well as that, the cost of referendums is something that impacts their likelihood of being called. Now, there's an argument that this point doesn't necessarily apply very well to this dot point, because high cost is something that more affects whether we would have a referendum or not. So it fits a little more around our final skill, maybe, and final dot point around discussing the ability of the people to change the constitution, because we might not get a chance because of how expensive they are. But it does affect, the likelihood of a referendum succeeding, because we might not have a referendum at all. So it's estimated that the referendum last year cost $400 million. And there are often other ways that the Commonwealth can achieve their aims without needing to change the constitution. So 1996 is a good example, post the Port Arthur tragedy. The Commonwealth wanted to get uniform gun laws across the country, so gun buybacks, introduce legislation that everyone across the country had to follow around gun ownership, who could, who couldn't, etc., how you store your guns, all those sorts of things. Not a constitutional power, so not something the Commonwealth could do. And one of the things they, I guess, could have done is called a referendum, asked for the constitution to be changed to give them that power, and then they could make these uniform laws. But instead, they negotiated with the states. The states all, agreed through that negotiation, and the states all just passed their own individual laws that were uniform across the country. This obviously saves the cost of having a referendum. So, again, probably more speaks to the idea of the ability of the Australian people to change the constitution, because we might not get the chance. But is certainly, a factor around the process of a referendum that comes into play. The other one is timing. Referendums are very expensive, so that sort of links in here. And as a result, they have in the past been held at the same time as an election, because that's something that has to happen every few years. So it's something that people already go into the voting box for. It's like, we'll hold a referendum while you're here. What that can mean, though, is that the referendum is a sort of a distraction. It's a second class, it's not as important as the actual vote for who is going to be your representative. Which political party you're going to vote for, because you want them to perhaps lead the country. And as a result, it might mean that people don't pay as much attention to the change as if it was a standalone. And that's, again, due to that high cost. And as a result, the timing of the process might take people's attention away from the question, which lines in really well, or connects really well, with our factor around people. And that is the fact that a lot of voters just simply won't understand what's being proposed. They won't bother to do the work. They won't bother to do any research. And if there's any lack of clarity at all, people are unlikely to support the change. Some people will just vote no because they prefer the status quo. They're like, hey, things are working okay for me at the moment. Like, if I change something, what could happen? Like that fear of the unknown. Why don't I just leave things the way they are? Because everything is fine for me at the moment. One thing that happens with referendums is information gets sent out to every household in Australia. It will include a pamphlet. And this is something that's, been debated a little bit at the last referendum about whether there would be a pamphlet or not. But the pamphlet gets sent out and it outlines what the change is and tells and gives people a written out case for yes and a written out case for no. Now, these cases are prepared by the politicians. So, when the Constitution Alteration Bill goes through Parliament, so we know the Constitution Alteration Bill has to go through, and obviously things in Parliament get voted on. If you're a politician who voted yes, you can then write the yes pamphlet. So all those politicians who wanted the referendum to happen, who voted yes, they'll then help write the yes pamphlet. Any politician who voted no and said we don't want a referendum, they then get to write or contribute to the no pamphlet. Now, this will come into my politics thing in a moment around bipartisan support, but essentially, every single person in Australia is going to receive really clearly this is yes, this is no, both put on the same set of paper, um, put in front of them as equals. And quite simply, if people aren't having any issues with how things currently are, they're psychologically more likely to steer to the no side. This can mislead people as a result. They can think that, oh, yeah, the case for both is equal. They maybe don't engage with it as much. Or some people just be like, oh, there's too much here. I'm not interested. Things are fine for me. This doesn't impact me. In 1988, they sent the booklet out. There were 4 proposals in 1988, so 4 referendums at once. The booklet was 31 pages long. I'm a bit of a constitutional nerd. I enjoy this stuff, and I'm not sure I'm going to get through a 31-page booklet. Um, also people aren't going to read the booklets if their minds are already made up. So, generally speaking, if an issue doesn't affect someone, they're more likely to vote no because they just want to keep things the way they are. As well as this, it comes into that psychology around people again prefer to vote for the prefer to accept what they currently have. They fear the unknown. They're not going to vote yes for the unknown. And this really played out in that 1999 Republic referendum, where even the people who wanted a republic in Australia, who wanted to get rid of the Queen, and still to this day, this is a little bit true, they couldn't agree on how to do that. They couldn't agree on who would be the head of state and how you would elect a president. And some people wanted the people to elect a president, and some people wanted Parliament to elect a president. And all of a sudden, it got confusing. So when the case was put to the people that we're going to replace the Queen and the Governor General with a president, well, now, like, what are you actually changing? How are we going to do that? Who's going to be the president? Who's going to get to vote on that? Like 2/3 majority of the houses? Well, is it going to be political? Like, what actual powers and role will they have? And people all of a sudden just go, hey, you know what? I don't know how that's going to affect my life. And my life's pretty fine at the moment. Why don't I just maintain the status quo? So the psychology of the voter is a factor that very much impacts whether referendums are successful or not. And it's very much around that idea that people fear change, people fear the unknown. And if a proposal at all lacks clarity and anything is ambiguous or undecided, people are very much probably not going to support it. We'll talk about the 2023 referendum next video, but that was a really, really successful element of the no campaign in 2023 was if you don't know, vote no. And they really put forward the idea that there was no clarity, that the change was unclear, that we didn't know how this would work. And people straight away went, well, if we don't know how it would work, we don't want it. 2023, the majority of the Australian population is not Indigenous. It was a change to bring in a voice for Indigenous Australians. The majority of the Australian population was like, well, it doesn't impact me. It doesn't affect me. My life, things are going okay for me at the moment. There's other challenges I have. Why would I risk bringing this in that could create other challenges? It's unknown. I'm just going to vote no instead. So, voter psychology, the people involved in voting for a referendum, are very much a factor that affects its likely success. finally, politics. And this is probably the rolled gold factor. I would say this is number one in terms of the easiest to put in an answer. And that is the fact that if both major political parties, so by both major political parties, we mean Labor on one side, and we say the coalition because they tend to, agree on these things, but the Liberal, and they are one party in Queensland and the Northern Territory, but the Liberals and the Nationals, if both major parties support a change, it's pretty much really, really common that that change will succeed. All 8 successful referendums have had bipartisan support. So all 8 successful referendums have had bipartisan support. Really important point to know. As soon as a referendum doesn't have bipartisan support, and generally because the government's introducing the constitutional alteration bill, it's usually part of government policy. It's usually the opposition party that's against it. Then they're all of a sudden campaigning, right? They've got, really strong access to the media. They have, a loyal following of a portion of the population that always votes for them, who are going to become advocates for their view. All of a sudden they can muddy the waters. They can really push this no case. We looked at the pamphlets that go out to the public. They can really push the idea that this change is bad or this change is not needed, and it becomes a political issue. In fact, some opposition parties can see opposing a referendum as a really good political tool. The government's referendum failed. The government couldn't pass this thing through that they wanted to. Maybe they're not very good. Maybe you should vote for us. So referendums can become a political issue, and the opposition, if they oppose the referendum, pretty much means it will face certain defeat. Once you have no bipartisan support, you generally have no chance of success. Really key thing to be able to put into an answer, and why I reckon it's the number one factor that's going to affect the likely success of a referendum. Even, you look at a referendum, I'll go back through to it. You look at a referendum like the 1951 referendum on the power to deal with communists and communism. This was a referendum that the Liberal Party introduced, and they were obviously really keen for the yes. And the Labor Party actually voted the Constitution Alteration Bill through Parliament, but then decided after the referendum had been agreed upon that they would oppose it. This referendum, there was a point about, I think it was about 2 months before the vote. So 2 months out, opinion polling showed that the population was ready to vote yes at about 73%. As soon as the Labor campaign gets rolling around no, and no develops a little bit of momentum, it's put forward that, hey, maybe we don't need to change things. Maybe, hey, you don't know what unintended consequences this is going to have. You don't know what, etc., etc., etc. That yes vote slowly eroded until by the time polling day came around, it had gone down to 49.44%. So, lost nearly a quarter of voters in those months leading in once there was an organised no campaign and that lack of bipartisan support. The other thing is that, generally speaking, a constitution is going to give more power to the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth isn't really in the business of calling referendums to give up power. So referendums are generally designed, if there's lawmaking powers involved, to give more power to the Commonwealth. And sometimes this is something that states get really, really opposed to. So states will be up in arms about this, and states will start, therefore, campaigning or advocating against the referendums. 17 times the Commonwealth has looked to increase their economic power, and voters have rejected it. So if you think about, you've got a federal government perhaps advocating a yes case, saying, yes, we need this change, yes, we need this referendum. But you've got an opposition party being like, we might be able to win some political stuff here. We'll campaign against it. And then you've got 3 or 4 states who are also being like, hey, this is an erosion of our rights. This is taking power away from us. All of a sudden, you can see how out in the media that no campaign is going to continue to get amplified, and it becomes political. It becomes, the government really pushing back against a large number of people with vested interests looking for no, and all of a sudden it's really easy for the public to get swept up in that no campaign. So politics, really, really powerful part of this, particularly making sure that like states are on board and the other political party is on board. Because if they're not, a referendum is highly unlikely to succeed. And you'll see what happened in that referendum that had a 62% yes vote. If you don't get 4 of the states on board, or the voters in 4 of the states, if states start actively campaigning against your referendum proposal, you're probably going down the path of not meeting that double majority requirement. So this needs an analysis. We're analysing factors affecting the success of a referendum. And this is from the VCAR sample examination question. So analyse why success in a referendum in Australia can be difficult. In your answer, refer to the 2023 referendum. We know that the 2023 referendum is something we're going to look at next video. But if we were doing an analysis here, analyse why success in a referendum in Australia can be difficult, we'd be looking to really explain in depth things like the process majority is really, really difficult to achieve. The threshold is really high. When party politics get involved, and the need for bipartisan support, a referendum can be highly unlikely to succeed if the opposing political party or the opposition is campaigning for no. Historically, no referendum has succeeded where both major political parties don't support it. So you're starting to bring in examples and facts which are going to turn this from an explanation into an analysis. 2023 referendum, again, we'll go over in the next video, but that's where you then be bringing in the fact that in 2023, this can be seen in 2023, so this can be seen as a great thing to use in an analysis. It shows that you are able to take a concept and apply it, which is a harder, higher level skill. This can be seen in the 2023 referendum, where there was a lack of bipartisan support, where the opposition campaigned actively for a no vote in the referendum. This dragged the expected yes vote from in the 60s down to the eventual result of 39%. So that would constitute an analysis, as opposed to that lower level explanation that, is only going to get you a few marks on this question. No links today because I've included them in each of the other videos. Hopefully, you have a really, really solid understanding now of what things are going to impact whether a referendum is successful or not, from politics to simply the fact that people don't like change, but also, as we went over in 4.2.9, just that the process is bloody hard. Feel free to leave feedback below, but happy studying one